Welcome to Brainstoryum. I'm Anna Tizard, award-winning dreampunk and deeply weird fantasy author, and yes, that's me and my fiction that's deeply weird. Explore and imagine with me the most unexpected story ideas using the surrealist word game of Exquisite Corpse. Find out more and join in at annatizard.com. This is a storytelling challenge unlike anything you've tried before. Hello imaginative people, I'm Anna Tizard and this is episode 85 of Brainstoryum. Well, I have a bumper show for you today, as I'm recording the introduction last this time round. The Exquisite Corpses turn out to be even crazier than usual today, so expect some laughs. Yet despite this, I find myself setting what might well be called a ludicrous writing prompt challenge. I just cannot help myself. And it actually turns out pretty well, I reckon. So while this will be a slightly longer episode, I think, than usual, please do listen on and join me in this bizarre journey into writing craft and hopefully a glimpse into a little bit of my slowly building collection. But first, I've been thinking about the usefulness of daydreaming for authors. It might seem counterintuitive to some, especially when you're trying to get going with a story or keep the momentum going with a story that's developing and growing and starting to get a bit complicated, which is kind of where I'm at the moment with a story that I'm working on that's decided it wants to be much longer than the rest of the collection. And I have a monster to wrestle with, as well as character epiphanies. At a time like this, doing nothing might seem like a strange choice. There's an instinct to keep battling it out when things get tough. But as someone who is very disciplined, maybe I'm a bit too strict with myself at times, it's possibly taken me longer than the average writer to discover just how valuable it is to step back mentally and regain a sense of lightheartedness about it all. Specifically, how much daydreaming can help. I know from experience how I can hammer away too hard at something, so determined I am to get the first draft down. And while dedication is vital in a complex art form like writing, where it's the long-term efforts that end up paying off, creativity and inspiration require playfulness to blossom, even when you're right in the thick of it. On the one hand, meditation is great for giving your brain a deep rest, and I've talked about that recently. But what about the in-between states of daydreaming and letting your thoughts meander? I put it out there on social media and posed the question to my fellow authors. How important is daydreaming to you as an author? Is it a good time to reflect on or make plans? Or do you think it's best to reserve some pure no-thinking time? Alessandro Bozzo said, "If we're talking about storytelling, I think daydreaming is very important. I find myself constantly daydreaming on story ideas, characters, etc. throughout my day. I'm still paying attention to reality." Good to know, Alessandro. "But in the quiet moments, my imagination seems to take over." Jack Daggy also said, "Love daydreaming. It relaxes me, distracts me, and unleashes my imagination." So both of these responses feel very spontaneous, just going with the natural flow and allowing inspiration to arise of its own accord through a more or less unprompted state of mind. It happens quite naturally. Another author, Nadia, said, "I daydream a lot. It's probably the catalyst for most of my work." Interesting. I asked Nadia, Do you have any particular time or place where you prefer to daydream? And she replied, usually before bed when I put music on to listen to. Music helps me visualize things better. So that sounds like a more deliberate practice of daydreaming, creating the space and environment to encourage that because you know that works for you. Patrick Towie said, I daydream a lot, so I say it is important. When I asked if Patrick set aside time for daydreaming, he said, unfortunately, I do not set aside time. I'm liable to daydream anytime. I think that letting your mind wander is more likely to bring good ideas if you read a variety of sources first. Give yourself some ingredients to cook. Aha, ingredients. It reminds me how I was talking about word food in the last show, if you remember, in the form of reading quality writing to nourish your imagination. While daydreaming might be a very open state of mind, it's true to say that what we feed our imagination will affect what they can stir up. Well, there you have it. Subtly different approaches to the art of daydreaming. It's one of those things I sometimes worry it might become a lost art, as most people you see on trains or buses or even walking down the street, you see them scrolling on their phones rather than staring into space. It probably does us good to let our minds wander freely from time to time. It might only be a small sample of authors I've taken from, but I'm glad to know I'm not alone in dabbling in daydreaming for encouraging my imagination to take flight. What will you daydream today, after today's show? Next, before we move on to the Exquisite Corpse games, I must share with you listeners' ideas on a writing prompt that came up in the last show, the skeletal muscle car. The self-named village idiot said, Rob Zombie was in the left lane behind the wheel of his Dragula, a hot rod that the monsters had painstakingly built for speed. The other lane had Johnny Cash awaiting in a green Frankenstein Cadillac, assembled over many years with a little help. A skeleton-crewed muscle car. Thank you, village idiot. A really visual scene. And now all I need is a green Dragula with smoky fire decals along the sides, maybe. Alessandro Bozzo said, Welcome to the Bedrock Museum, exclaimed the guide. Fred stared at the skeletal muscle car in awe. He used to watch them race as a kid. The guide looked his way. They don't use mammoth bones in cars anymore. They're an endangered species. This is the last of its kind. Now this one took me a moment, and then I thought, Fred? Bedrock? It's the Flintstones. Not so much four-wheel drive as 2 feet drive, scrambling underneath. Thank you, Alessandro. And finally, Nick Vrakar said, Death leaned back in his chair, twiddled his thumbs. Have you seen Waiting for Godot? A horseman's job is a lot like it. The Pale Rider doesn't actually ride a horse anymore, having traded it in for an old Dodge Challenger. Why ride one horse when I can ride 400? Okay, so now I'm thinking about the 4 horses of the apocalypse. If they were swapped for old Dodge Challengers, what then? There's some weird imagery. Thank you, Nick. Right, now it is time to find our own dodgy challenges from the Socks of Destiny. That's right, and for those who haven't played before or listened before, Exquisite Corpse mixes different players' words and phrases into a single sentence that goes describing word noun, action, describing word noun. So it is with some trepidation that I reach into the describing word sock. And our first word is from Sean, also known as Blue Wizard of Axe, maudlin. Okay, so it can be sort of overly sentimental, rather sort of depressive. Next word, our noun, is from Alessandro Bozzo, oratory. It's like a sort of a small chapel, isn't it, for more private worship. So a maudlin oratory, that would be, yes, a place of worship where maybe there's a belief system or religion that is based on really sad things, or the way that this person is praying or worshipping is in a sort of a self-pitying way. Because I know it's saying about the oratory being maudlin, but perhaps that's the person who's in it, using it, who is maudlin. And I'm just reaching into the wrong sock. I want now the action sock. And next entry is from Wendy. Happily devoured. Okay, so this apparently self-pitying, miserable person who's either worshipping a rather depressing god in a depressing religion, is now happily eating something. Very curious. Don't often come across entries that sort of conflict each other quite so obviously. But let's see what the next word is. This is from Mariah. Oh my goodness. Perspicuous. So clearly expressed, or just sort of easy to understand. So they're eating, happily devouring someone or something who is easy to understand. This is just getting weirder and weirder, but I'm going to reach into the final sock. If nothing else, it'll be entertaining, this one. Might it go down in the history of the weirdest and most impossible exquisite corpses? We shall see. This final one is from Alessandro Bozzo. Blobfish. Okay, this might actually, I say this, but this might actually be one of the worst, best, however you want to see it, the most ridiculous exquisite corpses I've ever come across. Altogether, if I can manage to say it without cracking up, we have the maudlin oratory, happily devoured, the perspicuous blobfish. I did look up blobfish a while ago when I first wrote this down. And yeah, they're these strange looking fish. They do look very blobby if you take one out of the water. But what it is they live at the very bottom of the ocean. So they're built to withstand the intense pressure, all the weight of that water at the bottom of the ocean. So obviously if you caught one and took it out the water, it just kind of sags and looks kind of like a droopy clown. But in the water, they just look kind of grey and lippy in the usual sort of deep sea fish way. But can we make any sense at all of this most ridiculous exquisite corpse? The maudlin oratory, happily devoured, the perspicuous blobfish. I have a feeling I also read somewhere that you can't eat them, that they're disgusting, these blobfish. So does it make sense that this person who has this depressing, sort of self-pitying religion or approach to their religion is kind of weirdly that their feelings are reversed when they can happily devour something quite revolting. Yes, I just think that the best green tea in the world would not help me resolve this exquisite corpse, but it is truly bonkers, and I will keep it. I will treasure it always. It will be a bit like that one. What was it? It was something like the humongous vampire vigorously washed the engorged cheese. You know, I don't think I'm ever going to write that, but I appreciate the exquisite corpse nonetheless. And maybe I should have some green tea. Now that I mention it, maybe that will help with the next one. We can but try. Let's give that a little stir. All right, so inspiration awaits, but not with this last exquisite corpse. Brilliant. Okay. Next, exquisite corpse begins with a word from Wendy. Vintage. Okay. Well, that might normally indicate clothes, perhaps. Let's see. If I can just disentangle these two words, which one wants to come out more? This is from Paul Benfield. Fire alarm. It sounds like a joke someone might make. Someone who's in charge of health and safety, and they see a really ancient, knackered fire alarm. They'll be like, yeah, that's vintage. Meaning, we need to change this. This item is too old. But, not sure if I could make a story out of that. Let's see what comes next. Our action is from Paul Thomas, if I can just unfold it. Brandished a sword at. A fire alarm. Brandishing a sword. Vintage or not. I think we would then have to interpret the fire alarm as a person who is either set off the alarm for a fire, or is the person yelling fire. Vintage, that now sounds kind of rude, like making up that they're old or something. But I mean, I'm a bit vintage, so that's okay. Next word. This is becoming a really, really bonkers session today. This is from Wendy. Sinister. Ooh. Okay. What or who was sinister? So sinister that someone decided to brandish a sword at them. Last word is from Lee Stokey. Welcome to the game, Lee. Frog. Oh, wow. Okay. We have a sinister frog in our midst. And not only that, but the vintage fire alarm, or person who's raised an alarm about there being a fire, someone who's shouting fire, fire, brandished a sword at the sinister frog. This is truly surreal. Did whoever raised the alarm about the fire, or perhaps it was their general job to raise alarms about issues like fires, invasions, if this is, I don't know, a village or something, or it's just someone on security. It could be a modern day contemporary situation, say a security person at the front door of a club. And so naturally it's part of their job to raise alarms about things like fires or whatever. But this time it's a rather unusual situation where they see a sinister looking frog. And it's their duty to raise the alarm about it. Oh my goodness. Do you know what? I'm going to move straight on to the third and final Exquisite Corpse and hope that there is something doable in this that doesn't just wake me up in the middle of the night and make me think, oh, sinister frogs. I must write a story about sinister frogs. So the first word is from Alessandro Bozzo, grotesque. I'm feeling we might still be in frog territory. I'll try to leave that behind and think fresh thoughts. We're thinking, okay, another bit of green tea. See if that makes a difference. Yes, fresh inspiration. New words from Mariah. Caveman with a telescope. Well, thank you, Mariah. You've added some detail here. I wonder if this will become highly significant. A grotesque caveman with a telescope. Hang on. So is there maybe a time loop nearby or something? A time machine through which a telescope has dropped into the hands of a caveman who has no idea what this object is or does. Okay. So then the next entry, which is the action, of course, is from Sean, also known as Blue Wizard Facts. Filled to overflowing. Okay. So right about now we need a receptacle, like a cup or a bowl or a bucket. But of course, we're not going to get that, are we? Next word is from Alessandro Bozzo. Expansive. Well, that would go with something that is filled to overflowing. Could it be a water bomb? What is a caveman doing with a water bomb? And the final word, what's it going to be? This is from Paul Thomas. It's all up to you, Paul Thomas. I don't know how to pronounce this. Is it aesthete or aesthete? Someone who is like sensitive to art and beauty or appreciates beauty. Aesthete. The expansive aesthete. Oh, hang on though. Just wait a second. Altogether we have the grotesque caveman with a telescope, filled to overflowing, the expansive aesthete. I'll tell you what this makes you think of, and this only just makes sense, in my mind at least, hopefully in yours in a moment, is that if you fill to overflowing this aesthete, this person who appreciates art and beauty, and they're expansive to boot, then that means that this grotesque caveman with a telescope, perhaps it's the image of him, or just the fact of his existence. She comes across him and it fills her to overflowing with aesthetic feelings and appreciation. Good Lord, we have got some supremely bizarre exquisite corpses today, and I feel like this is a mega challenge. But at the same time, that's why I do this, because I've got to stretch my imagination. It can't all just be about whatever's tinkering around in my brain. I need to stretch my writer's imagination and see what comes up. I think it must be time to use the pause button and wish me luck. Okay, I'll tell you what I've been thinking, because I have been thinking. It's been a couple of days since I recorded those Exquisite Corpse results, and I've realised what I've had in the back of my mind the whole time is that I'd really like to find an idea to resolve the creepy carnival story that I began in the last show. As ridiculous as these exquisite corpses seem today, I can't quite shake off that urge to try and turn one of them into a solution for something I've started. And I think what I'm looking for is a monster. Now, to either remind you of the first part of the story you heard 2 weeks ago, or to give you a gist if you haven't yet listened, it introduces Madame Della, a clairvoyant who works at a carnival, and Pixel, a boy who scouts the carnival grounds for potential customers for her, encouraging teenage girls in particular who are just sort of milling around and not sure where to go or what to do. Pixel eavesdrops on their conversations to pick up hints about their personal lives. Then, once he's convinced them to go and have their future told, he texts Madame Della at high speed with the details so she can wow them with her apparent psychic abilities. But Pixel has some disturbing information about the grumpy carnival manager, which was part of the Exquisite Corpse that inspired the story. And when he prepares to tell Madame Della this news, his fingers poised dramatically over her crystal ball, it lights up. That's pretty much where I left it in the last show, though I talked through the main options that I was thinking about at that time as to where this should go next. Is Mr. Egsby, the carnival manager, some kind of monster? Or is there some other horrific secret at the heart of this carnival which Pixel has just stumbled across and which involves the carnival manager? Pixel might be mistaken about this gossip. He might be wrong. He might be partly right. I'm hunting for a twist to this story as much as I'm hunting for a solution, because I do like my surprises in stories. And as I'm building a collection of short stories based on weird creatures, I'm drawn to the idea of a monster. But can I find a development and a resolution to this story I've begun using one of the ridiculous exquisite corpses that have come up today? And am I crazy to even try? Well, that's a whole other question, people. As hilarious as the resulting sentences have been today, I feel like they do present me with a choice between two types of monster, or the basis for two potential monsters. It's a matter of taking a bit of what they imply and using these ideas as springboards for my imagination to reinterpret. So we don't have to be literal. On the one hand, we have a blobfish, a strange, gelatinous creature with weak bones suited to its high-pressured habitat at the bottom of the ocean, where it just kind of hovers and eats whatever comes its way. They have a low metabolic rate, conserving energy by this not actively hunting, by just sitting there. And this quality of being a passive predator with a large mouth that sort of engulfs whatever comes their way, that sparks my imagination a little bit. You could turn that into the basis for quite an unusual monster. If I were to use this exquisite corpse, the one with the blobfish, I also have the option of using the maudlin oratory, which happily devours the blobfish. This maudlin oratory is a curious phrase. It gives me a sort of vague outline in my mind's eye as to what that might be, but that's it. Then again, sometimes that's all you need as you just sit down with your pen and brainstorm, which I highly recommend. Just go with it. See where it takes you. But I feel like that part, the maudlin oratory, adds something extra to this blobfish exquisite corpse, even if I can't work out how that would fit in with a carnival yet. I mean, I'm going to be using the pause button again for some drafting, so I will have time. The other monstrous option offered by today's ridiculous exquisite corpses is the sinister frog. Well, looking up frogs, there are quite a few weird creature features they have which you could use as the basis for a type of monster. They don't drink, They absorb water through their skin. They use their eyeballs to help swallow food, pushing them inwards to force food down. That's pretty weird. Some species secrete poison through their skin. Webbed feet are very cool, very different from our own. We have a tiny amount of webbing between our fingers, but nothing like frogs. I like the idea of someone trying to hide the fact that they have more webbing than usual. Someone who sweats a lot with bulbous eyes. Might not be a monster at all. The last Exquisite Corpse, which sparked off the beginning of the Carnival story, contained the bulbous lamp. Could that have any connection to this? Time will tell. With the magic of the pause button, you'll get to find out sooner than later. So let us return to the moment, or begin from the moment if you haven't heard the first part of this story, to where the boy, Pixel, has his fingers poised around the lit up crystal ball and is telling Madame Della, the clairvoyant, the strange information he has about the carnival manager. I've seen him when he's on his own in that office. Pixel swallowed. He collects screams. What? Madame Della pulled back, astounded, trying to hide a bemused grin. Don't laugh, Pixel said, and the light from the crystal ball flickered as if picking up on his own indignance. I think he's some kind of creature. Well, Madame Della leaned back in her chair. For a few swollen seconds, there seemed to be nothing else to say. The boy had some funny ideas, that much was true. So far, she'd turned a blind eye to his apparent lack of schooling. The only sign of a secure home was his clothes, which varied from day to day and at least started out clean. He got snippy whenever she asked about his parents, so she didn't like to ask, but he certainly had some, or one, or a guardian of sorts. It was surely none of her business, but if he was starting to believe things like this, impossible things, strange ideas, if he was missing out on schooling, maybe his mind was starting to generate its own stimulation in the absence of any sort of learning or structure to his day. She sat forward again. What did you see exactly? Pixel swallowed. If I tell you, will you get me some fish and chips? Madame Della narrowed her eyes at him, then blustered out a sigh at the poor mite. She would have bought him fish and chips anyway. He didn't have to bargain with her. Go on then, but you'd better not be lying. I'm not. His eyes widened in innocence. The crystal ball seemed to swell with light, as if in agreement, drawing Madame Della's astonished gaze downwards again. Pixel hurried on. He's got jam jars with screams inside them, and a net, and he sets traps for them. For screams? He nodded. Madame Della couldn't keep the amusement out of her voice this time. Sweetheart, you can't catch screams in a jam jar. That's such a funny idea, though. It's not, cried Pixel, standing up. The crystal ball flared red, then faded. Both of them stared, caught in their own wonder at this mystery. Honey, Madame Della began again, more gently this time. Has this ever happened before, with the light coming on and off? I don't just mean with my crystal ball, with anything, with the lights that are switched off. Have you done that before with your hands? She was reluctant to believe in stuff like that, but even so, could she disbelieve her own eyes? Maybe they could turn it into part of her act or something. Pixel pressed his lips together, considering the glass orb as it faded, now that his hands were at his sides. Sometimes it happens, he said. Maybe. His eyes met hers, full of shyness. Ever since I opened one of them jam jars and touched a scream. He sent her off for fish and chips, and ice creams too, which meant traipsing to the opposite side of the carnival. That would keep her occupied for long enough. Pixel picked his way through the crowds, ducking and darting faster than any of these people could. He knew where Mr. Exby would be, since Mr. Exby wasn't getting around so much these days. Pixel knocked on the door of the prefab office and let himself in without waiting for an answer. The man barely lifted his head. He drooped, sated, exhausted, sagging over the edges of his fold-out chair, his skin greyed with lack of sunlight, or with some other effect of what he'd been up to. Pixel should know. Pixel had known more than a few carnival managers in his time. This was why he'd had to tell that story to Madame Della. A little bit of the truth, a tidbit, was all that was needed to keep her wary enough to keep her distance from the dangers of the carnival. She couldn't know too much, or she might not stay. That would be no good at all. Over the months, Pixel had grown fond of the old lady, although really she wasn't that old, and he'd begun to worry about her. "Stay away from the ghost train," he found himself saying, "and don't talk to that guy who runs the bumper cars, he's a weirdo." She'd chuckle and shake her head and possibly worry about his education, or the lack of it. But though she was no psychic, she surely picked up something strange about this place, and it was better to feed her half-truths, to keep her curiosity satisfied just enough. "Are you still in there, Mr. Exby?" Pixel crept closer, peering at the man who was more a creature by now. The jam jars were lined up against the wall, just as Pixel had said. Silken strands twisted like ribbons inside them, although someone like Madame Della probably wouldn't be able to see them. She was too of this world for that. "Mr. Exby?" The man grunted, his chin lolling on his chest. Pixel tiptoed closer. The carnival manager was like one of those deep-sea fish, Pixel mused, a real bottom feeder that just sat and waited on the seabed for some half-transparent fish carcass to float down, or other bits and bobs that happened to disperse near enough its mouth that it could be bothered to open it. "A real blobfish," murmured Pixel, tilting his head to take in the size of the man. The fact was, the carnival needed a vacuum cleaner of this kind. The candy floss sticks, the sweet wrappers, food wrappers, cigarette cast-offs, even though it was a no-smoking site, clothes lint, pocket dust, screams, giggles, stomach-clenching laughter, questions, wishes, urges, whispers, more screams. All of these teemed in the very air of the carnival. Someone had to suck it all up, manage it, or the atmosphere would become unbearable, too densely packed, toxic. Pixel had seen the fights and the raids that broke out when a carnival wasn't mopped up properly, and it could cause a lot of damage, not just to the rides and the equipment, but to people's fists and faces, to reputations, to the freedom of the carnival to do what it did, to exist for the entertainment and healthy distractions of a seething mass of teenage desire. "That's why I had to tell her just a little part of the story," said Pixel, bending down to address the man, or what was left of him. Mr. Exby blinked blearily at Pixel, regarding him like he was his next potential meal. As he sat forward, the chair creaked under his weight. "That's it," said Pixel. "Come and get me. In fact, I know where you can find a stash of rich, ripe screams. You'd like that, wouldn't you?" Mr. Exby ran a pink tongue over his puffy lips. Pixel resisted a shudder and leaned forward to help the man up. "Come on, Mr. Exby, let me show you. After all, the ghost train is the best ride at the carnival, isn't it?" Pixel cast about for the manager's big black cloak, then threw it over Mr. Exby's shoulders. The two figures staggered out of the office, one under the other's weight, the other with the full-to-bursting gluttony of the carnival's psychic fare. "I know where we can make you better," reassured Pixel, as his companion grunted at the confusion of chatter, shouts, laughter and clanging music that thronged the soft evening air. Like a lump of shadow in the gathering dark, they shuffled their way past small crowds and teenagers milling around, busy swiping their phones and taking photos. A gurgle emitted from Mr. Exby's throat, deep and hungry. "Just a little bit further," Pixel urged him on, willing him not to reveal his monstrousness to these unsuspecting carnival goers. A girl screamed and dropped her phone at the sight of them. "Something for the ghost train," Pixel declared with his cheekiest grin and a wink. Still wild-eyed, the girl bent to pick up her phone. While she was down, Pixel ushered Mr. Exby along, weaving him around another clutch of friends, trying to avoid lingering glares with something that looked like self-assurance. At last, the ghost train and its gaping skull entrance. Pixel steered Mr. Exby past the queue that clustered around the waiting train seats, and they made their staggering way along the side of the makeshift building. Here, away from the lights and crowds, the air was clearer and the grass less trodden, a deep dark green in the coolness of the shadows. He lifted a flap, twisted a doorknob, and pushed Mr. Exby through a hidden side entrance. Immediately, they were hit by the jangling organ music with its interjecting evil cackles. In the blackened corridor, there was nothing to distract from this garish noise until the vague beams of light swung by, smothered by the thick curtains of fabric that was interspersed by hardboard dividers separating them from the ride. Pixel held his phone in front of their feet to show them the way. Mr. Exby would never notice that Pixel hadn't touched his screen to light it up. Mr. Exby seemed slightly energized, perhaps comforted by the cloaking darkness. From behind the dividers, the clatter of the ghost train carried fresh laughter and frightened shouts. Pixel didn't look, but he could imagine the hungry expression on Mr. Exby's face as his lumbering pace picked up. A corner, another stretch of corridor. They were going deeper into the belly of the ride, the secret labyrinth that existed only for carnival staff, the hidden spaces in between. For there was so much more to this place than any curious customer would ever see, no matter how many corners they peeked around. The point of a ghost train was surprise, sudden jolts, shocks. For these effects to work, they had to be fleeting. Strapped into the ride, no one ever stopped for more than 5 seconds in any one place. Scenery didn't have to be perfect, it had to be good enough, as a backdrop for the rubber skeletons springing from their hiding places with an automated pulley, and the woman in a witch costume reaching out with curled fingers and a cackle, as if she hadn't reached out and cackled all day long for the minimum wage. But the chapel, that was different. Pixel began to hum a tune. At another muted flash of light through a curtain, the ghost train knocking and jolting past, he waited a beat, lifted a curtain, and they were through. Thin lights refracted from high up, either side in yellow, red and blue. The stained glass windows activated by a drizzle of light from behind them. Man and boy stumbled forward along the central aisle, flanked by a few rows of seats, some of which were real, others which were painted onto a board. It didn't matter. Pixel knew how to merge with the effects of the carnival. He was a part of it. Mr. Exby was now too, more than the man could ever truly grasp. At the end of the aisle there was no altar, but a gloomy archway, more like the door to a sarcophagus than something you'd find inside a chapel. But this was part of a ghost train ride, so any combination of spiritual and morbid would do. No common sense was required. To enter a carnival was to leave the ordinary daylight world behind. The archway's stones glimmered grey-white and cold. Stones made to look like polystyrene, painted to look like stones. The tea lights, quivering their amber flames either side of it, couldn't be real, not for health and safety reasons, and not if people were to believe that the stones weren't really stones. A cold wind blew from the darkness of the archway, ruffling their hair and Mr. Exby's cloak. Screams flew around the two hunched figures, sounds whipped like crazed spirits, distant and yet close. The mechanics of the train going clickety-click, somewhere else in the chuddering ride, a reminder that some of these screams belonged to the living, the ones who paid to join the ride, oblivious to the real darkness thumping its horrible heart inside the carnival. Mr. Exby mumbled and licked his lips, remembering the flavour and no doubt wondering what fresh new delights wafted for him here in this chamber. A puff of mist emerged from the dark mouth of the archway and uncoiled into a threaded outline of a woman. The voice that echoed made Pixel look up, his face alight with wonder. "My son, you bring me another one." "Yes, mother," said Pixel. "This one wasn't strong enough either." Mr. Exby let out a whimper, as if he understood his time was up. The spirit touched her hands to his chin, drawing the man's face upwards. He has lost himself in all this, indulged himself too far. "But someone has to." The spirit held up her other hand. "No, it's too many. He is not of this place. He should go back." Pixel frowned and clenched his fists. "But he knows too much. You have to take him. Take him beyond." "Pixel, my little one." She turned her attention to the boy, though it was like being regarded by an iridescent shadow. "You grow callous and hard-hearted. The chapel will happily devour this spirit, but you need to find a better solution to maintain the balance in the carnival." "The carnival's always hungry," said Pixel with a pout. "You said so yourself. You're always saying that." There was a glimmer in the shadow shape before him that might have been a smile. "Then find someone who's hungry too, hungry enough to overstep the mark and be glad of his or her initiation to the carnival." With that, she withdrew, beckoning to the stooped man who took one uncertain step towards her, then another. Pixel turned away, tapping his chin as he puzzled this over. He didn't need to see or hear the rest. Stepping away quietly, ducking under the curtain, the screams and crazed laughter that raged from the deep, dark hole under that archway might have been a fresh load of ghost train riders passing by, tumbled into one. It was always a noisy thing, disposing of a carnival manager. But since they'd swallowed so many screams, he could only wonder if there was peace for them on the other side, or in the fabric of the carnival, which is where their spirits tended to linger afterwards, clinging on, spooking out the customers. It was a system that worked very well. Had he really become callous, like his mother had said? Outside, in the sharp night air, he spied a flash of an expensive phone, a glittering watch from under the sleeve of a black suit. A tall, thin man sniffed the air, eyeing the lights of the spinning rides with a touch of a sneer, as if this place was a commodity, bankable. Pixel grinned. The man looked hungry in his own way. How much could he swallow? Okay, so have I done it? The maudlin oratory happily devoured the perspicuous blobfish. I'm not sure if the blobfish is particularly perspicuous or clearly expressed. There's a lot of mumbling going on there, but I'm certain that he is swallowed by the oratory. Would you believe the one exquisite corpse that was so ridiculous that I just sat and laughed at it? I'd almost forgotten about that. And here we go. It just goes to show you never know where inspiration is going to come from. I might have to go back and add some maudlin quality to the oratory if I want to be strict about the whole thing. Reading it through, as it is a barely tweaked first draft, bear that in mind, it feels a little bit wordy to me in places. I'm sure there are some places where I can cut down and sharpen up. But time is always the thing here. After I've drafted a new story, it needs to rest so I can come back to it with fresh eyes and ears and work out what it needs and see if the resulting tale will be right for my collection. Well, that was mighty strange, wasn't it? I'm trying to remember. I think there might have been maybe one other time when I've deliberately set out to use a second Exquisite Corpse to try and resolve a story I've begun using an initial Exquisite Corpse. I might be wrong. There might have been more than one. I'd have to have a look through some old notes and drafts to be sure. But what shall I suggest for your feedback and ideas? I feel like the sinister frog has remained unexplored since it was a choice between that and the blobfish today. Maybe that would be one to develop a monster from, since I didn't. Or you might prefer the grotesque caveman with a telescope. What does that make you think of? You know what to do. Go to annatizard.com and click a contact button at the bottom of any page and let me know your bizarre thoughts. Just a paragraph will do, and yes, if you can submit before next Friday, that is a week from when this is released, just to make sure I get it in time before I record again. Until next time, go forth and be inspired. I hope you enjoyed today's Brainstoryum. You can find out more about Exquisite Corpse and my series, The Book of Exquisite Corpse, at annatizard.com. Subscribe to my e-newsletter and you'll get Volume 1 for free. And while you're there, why not submit a few words to the Socks of Destiny on my play page? You may inspire me or inspire yourself to write a unique new story. See you next time.